All right. So I think that
Hold on. I'm like swooning. I'm so over the moon to hear everything he just said for the third time.
well, today I had an interesting thought, actually, that like Glenn Greenwald and Darren Beattie might be people that you could write for. That, right? Like you're not welcome at Reality Sandwich anymore or the LA Weekly or whatnot. But
I'm not giving my talent to writing about the fucking sham show. I have novelty to bring into this planet.
Absolutely. But also some of the shit you say about the sham show is pretty funny, right? And right now you're not getting paid for saying it. Therefore you could get paid, right, to say it. And that could fund the more meaningful works and whatnot, right? Like my friend Les, like how I ever met him, Les Lethort, right, he was already like a patron of mine. I didn't even know it, but I saw Revolver News linked to his like Twitter where he was doing the, Ukraine illusion warfare thing, right? So these are people that appreciate this sort of, the type of of humor, right? Like you were swooning. My guess would be he will swoon back, right? So anywho, you like to write. I don't like to write. So It was just a thought, right?
Thank you. I'll feel into
it. And okay, so a couple of things. Everything he said is I completely agree with. It's stuff that we maybe in a different set of words have really covered. And I highly recommend people watch that full interview with Glenn and Darren because they go into more interesting, there's some interesting things brought up there that aren't spoken about here. He touched on them in this rant, but didn't go deeply as he did into the interview. And some of the things said are pretty revealing. Like there's a part where he talks about that there's I don't know if he was saying that this interview occurred on the Lex Fridman podcast or just that he had seen this interview with Susan Wojcicki from YouTube, where she talked about why Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson are algorithmically driven, even though they seem to oppose certain aspects of the woke ideology that's being pushed. And she responded that even though we don't like some of the things they say, they're good for de-radicalizing people who might otherwise go farther and whatnot. So there was an interesting exchange around that. And then there was also an interesting exchange around, there was one other thing he said in this piece we just listened that he didn't go as far into as he did on the thing with Glenn. I can't think of it right now, but I highly recommend people watching that.
I thought it was interesting just in terms of getting a glimpse of your screen. Whenever I watch a YouTube video, on the right-hand side, I'm not kidding. It's like at least the top 3 or 4 are them shoving Lex down my throat. And I'm like, I don't watch him. I don't care. So I really appreciated hearing that.
Yeah. The other thing is, and he's right. Like if you have your YouTube set to autoplay, where it's just as soon as the thing you're watching will go next, if you fall asleep listening to something, which I often do, in fact, I highly recommend if you're having trouble sleeping, just put a Lex Fridman podcast on because you will be asleep like that, gone, like another world, right? But yes, there's like 3, it's generally Tim Pool or Lex Fridman that you find yourself on if you get pulled into that. I don't have mine set on autoplay, but every once in a while it'll accidentally get switched on and then you'll find that happening. Oh, I know what I was going to say. There's one comment that Darren makes in the interview with Glenn where he basically very delicately implies that Lex Fridman might be a handler, right? And I think it would be interesting if we tried to figure out if he was the first of the crew of he calls it the extended Rogan cinematic universe that includes the intellectual dark web and all that kind of stuff, right? And he goes into some specifics about different people that Joe has on and why like they become accepted because Joe is deferential. He talks about the level of deference that Joe shows to Lex is beyond anything he's ever seen before. Yeah. And I'm wondering, it would be really interesting to see if Lex arrived here in Austin first. We know about when Elon arrived. We know about when Joe arrived. We know about when Michael Malice arrived. Adam Curry was here first, which obviously casts him in the role as pod father extraordinaire.
And allegedly, Adam is part of the reason why Joe is here now.
I think it's all entirely possible. So Adam's been here for quite a long time though, so I don't know that he was part of like this segment of the operation.
I think he just got pulled in recently.
Okay, so, but it would be interesting to know when he arrived, right? And this is the whole, I mean, if we pay attention, and I still highly recommend for those who haven't, go watch the Congress with Robin Wright Penn. If Austin is the headquarters for fake Hollywood, for CGI derived Hollywood, for cloned, virtual reality, blah, blah, blah. Remember, like Joe early on, like a long time ago when he was in Los Angeles, was one of the first podcasts.
Hey, superstars, thank you so much for sharing your sacred attention with me. If you are receiving any value whatsoever from my videos, I am encouraging you to give back, to pay it forward by supporting me on my Patreon community, on my locals community, on both. Your support allows me to keep on keeping on and to keep making content like this. It used to be much easier back in the days of a free press, but now given all of the censorship and the shadow banning, it really is challenging for content creators to continue to put out so much work. I'll just speak for myself. I'm excited for it to be easier for me to continue to put out more content. And the primary way that it can be easier is by you supporting me financially by way of my Patreon and or my locals, where for as little as $5 a month, you get to be my hero and receive oodles of bonus content, and we both get to win. Okay, thank you so much for your support, for your attention, and for being omniscopic amazingness.
The first podcast where people were like, starting to talk about like, oh, how crazy it's going to be when there's deep fakes and CGIs, and remember all that. So he was talking about that quite a long time before now, right? And so the whole thing about the Congress is about people selling their image into the system, and then they never participate again, but they're like super rich, and so who cares? And then these controlling factors can really basically do whatever they like with your image.
Yep.
Now, to Darren and Glenn, I love the level of granularity in pulling up the fact that that blackboard in the background was one that was also in somebody else's picture in somebody else's video, and really bringing to the forefront the fact that Lex does not work at MIT. In fact, it's entirely possible he just rented a room and did a talk there. Like, I love that level of research. I highly recommend you check out even just the title of his thesis, which is about, like, I can't remember the exact words that were used. I think it was, let's see if they've updated it so that we can't find this, because the internet works for Lex Fridman apparently, but let's see if we can find it. No, it's still there. Learning of identity from behavioral biometrics for active authentication, 2014, right? So I think that like his project, and remember, they refer to him in that interview as having, like, Glenn Greenwald is fascinated at how Lex, who was an unknown at this time, for his 8th episode, got Eric Schmidt from Google to come on. I do think that Lex does do work for Google machine learning, right? So I completely think that there could be absolutely a project running here based on Lex's thesis, which may or may not be his own. He may just be the man in black with the CIA suit fronting this idea, right? And that's kind of what's going on here. And like, he kind of arrived, and maybe all of these people who have arrived here, either willingly, unwillingly, knowingly, unknowingly, are participating in this. And it's really about, I don't think it's about, at this point, everything being fake. I think it's about intermixing fake stuff with real stuff and seeing if people are able to differentiate so they can start to work out the kinks in their system, right?
Well, and I also think it's a test in terms of like how much they can push algorithmic, like just the whole algorithmic narrative, and like pushing him in people's faces when he obviously has no personality, nothing interesting to say. So I feel like he's kind of, I just saw another one of your white floating things.
Oh, okay.
But if he's not like a kind of walking chat GPT embodiment, and we've talked about this, they're just seeing how far they can push the fakeness of Lex to see how easy to manipulate the audience is.
And for people who have been following along, either just through Project Kids or certainly more deeply with playing the Glass Bead game, I have been talking for a really long time about how I think even just down here in the trailer on the lake, that they're using this as some sort of open air set for augmented reality. There was just another one, right? Okay. And that some days I feel like some of the people out there are not really there. They're like projections, or they're some sort of like mechanized thing. Like, because when I see people walking or running funny, it's like all the people that day. And then like another day, everyone will be looking normal. Like, so it's like, okay, let's send in the clones and see if anyone notices or whatever it is. And this extends to Lex himself. Like I have recounted here with you and on other shows that, like, you know, I've seen him now, what, 3 or 4, maybe 5 times on the trail, sometimes with Laura now, before it was just by myself. And there's an inconsistency in his movement.
Totally.
That is not, now, like there's inconsistency in my movement sometimes based on how my body feels. So I'm accounting for that, but this is different. This is a different inconsistency. Like generally when one is in pain, it doesn't change their level of coordination. It changes how fast they're moving. What is that?
This is all we have to get through in the next 15 minutes.
We can do it. Let's test our time dilation
We just
skill.
haven't gotten into any of it yet.